Thank you, Anita, for the great overview today. Ms. Takai, thank you very much for your presentation. We are honored to have you at our event today. Our first presentation today is Agile Methods, Tools, Techniques, and Practices for the DoD Community by Mary Ann Lapham. As a senior member of the technical staff at the SEI, Mary Ann Lapham supports and improves the acquisition of software-reliant systems. She has worked with the DoD program offices to advise on software issues at the system and/or segment level. And now I'll turn the presentation over to Mary Ann Lapham. Mary Ann, all yours.
Thank you, Shane. And good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone on the call. First, I'll just quickly go over the agenda of the things I'm going to cover today. We don't have a lot of time to talk about a lot of the things that Ms. Takai mentioned that we're going to have to do to make Agile really active for a DoD environment, but we'll touch on a few of them. First, what's the problem? I'll set the context of where we started, and then our journey really quickly, and then how we're solving the problem, and then we'll talk about some interesting things we found on our journey, the difference between traditional and agile methods, and comparing cultural elements.
Good. First, a quick polling question, folks. This polling question is going to help Mary Ann with some of the talking points today, so we see who is in our audience. So please identify yourself as one of the following: DoD Program Office, Federal Program Office, non-DoD, contractor, commercial, consultant for tools or processes, or other. And we'll give you about 15 seconds to vote on that. Then we'll view the results, and that will help Mary Ann tailor the talk a little bit. Okay, and now we will push the results. Okay, about 1% from a DoD program office, 1.4% from a federal program, 31.4% contractor, federal DoD, 14% from commercial, 21.2% as a consultant for tools or processes, and other is 30.9%. So hopefully that'll help you a little bit. So a wide mix. So back to you, Mary Ann.
Okay, thank you, Shane. Okay, so the problem. As Mr. Takai mentioned, historically, we've had a traditional approach that's taken, in some cases, up to 81 months, and in others, we all know, take longer. But if we even use the 81 months, we start out and we go through the traditional approach, and we don't get a result of usable code, usable anything for 81 months. So the problem is, given today's environment where people want results faster, they want to be able to use the application sooner, there's a real need both in the marketplace and in commercial world and in the DoD. How do we get that stuff to them quicker? Well, iterative approach, which lends itself to agile methods. So that's what we're trying to do. How do we get from this long 81-month cycle or longer to short iterative approaches that give us some results quicker so we have something in the field for people to use? That's the problem. How do we do that? Well, to add to that problem in the DoD environment, and for those of you who aren't DoD but work in highly regulated environments, you may have some of the similar issues. You have a very prescribed vision of how you're supposed to do things. If you look at the green bar on your slide, that's basically the 5000 series acquisition lifecycle that we all know and love, and we've used for years and years and years. And typically, we've used the traditional method, mostly waterfall, as you can see on the chart in the next section. Requirements all done, then analysis all done, followed by design, code, test, and finally it gets operational 81 months or longer later. So what we want to do is come up with an evolving vision that allows us to get some applications out there sooner so that the users can actually use them in a short period of time, 18 months, maybe 2 years at the most. And how does that vision, which is depicted on the bottom, fit into our fixed acquisition cycle that we have to use? That's the problem. How do we go from the traditional method to a more agile, iterative method and still use the overriding life cycle that we have to follow? So we've been exploring that. Our journey started about 2009 when one of our Air Force clients said, so what is this Agile stuff? Can I use it in my stuff? And that started us on our journey with a review of the 5000 series to see if there was anything in it that would preclude us from using it, and there wasn't. And from there, we've gone on to attack different parts of the acquisition process so that we could help people know how to implement them in the DoD environment. So what we started with is people that knew a whole bunch about the traditional DoD acquisition framework and basically the waterfall method. They knew how to make it work. They knew how it fit into the acquisition lifecycle. They were experts at that. But the problem was, how were they going to get the Agile lean principles that a lot of you in the commercial world know and use every day, and it's just normal for you? Well, for some of the people in the DoD environment, they are unfamiliar with that. They find it scary. They wonder if it's really going to fit within our required acquisition life cycle. So how do I go about doing it? And there's a lot of holes in that. And so it's a puzzle for them. And some of the puzzle pieces are in place and some are missing, as you can see by the head on the diagram. So what we are attempting to do is figure out how to complete that picture for them, figure out what the gaps are, give them information so that they can, in the normal DoD environment, use Agile methods, know exactly what it means, know how to implement them, and move forward and give actual working software to our clients, the end user, the guys in the field, in 18 months. So we figured out what the gaps are. We're going to use some stakeholders in the DoD to help us make sure we're looking at the right gaps, and then characterize what those gaps are, try to build the puzzle pieces, and then fill in the head so we have a complete picture. So what we're doing is we're using our Agile methods to study the Agile methods. We have a backlog, all the puzzle pieces, and they all have names, things like, oh, how do I do contracting? How do I do requirements management? How do I do costing estimation? How would I do test? How would I do system engineering? How would that feed in an Agile environment? All those kinds of things, and we have a list of probably at least 30 topics, some of which we're working on now and some are to be addressed later. And we take each topic and we're going to work with our DoD acquisition stakeholders and make sure that the problems we see with those topics in the DoD environment are what we are addressing so that we're not doing something that's interesting but not useful to them. And then we do our research, we pilot it with the practitioners. We actually are using a lot of the methods we've seen in the commercial arena, and there's a lot of literature out there about it, so we look at those and then we try to translate that into DoDEs, if you will. Believe it or not, and most of you in the DoD environment know this, terms in the commercial world might mean totally opposite things in the DoD world. So we're trying to make sure we don't have any of those so people get confused. Anyway, we get our pilot of our use, we go back through, make sure the solution is accurate, and then we'll publish it. And eventually, our end user has validated tools, techniques, and practices. And they're codified, for use from now until we find implementations to improve them. So some of the things that we found is there's traditional incremental delivery and there's Agile methods, and so what's different about them? Okay, in the traditional, your relationship with your end user is at arm's length. Tell me what you want, go away, and I'll come back X number of months later and give you the solution. And it's a very command and control based team. Somebody tells you what to do, we're going to do requirements, then we're going to do design, and then we're going to do coding, and so forth. In an Agile method, you want your end user to be collaborative. You want them involved as much as possible day to day. You want your teams co-located, and you want strong communication mechanisms, and as Ms. Takai said, there's lots of them out there now. So the teams don't have to be in the exact same location. You can have distributed teams. You're going to have teams that are collaborative. They're going to be cross-functional. We'll get to that in a little bit on the next slides. You want a leader in the traditional environment who's a keeper of the vision, and he's the primary authority to act. In the Agile method, you want facilitative leadership. So your leader is a champion and a team advocate. So they help the team become empowered, and the team guides themselves to a certain degree. In the traditional world, you have representative documentations that the program office uses to oversee the program and the progress of the developer. Those documents are actually used to maintain progress of the development, and they're critical for how the oversight is performed by the Program Management Office. In Agile methods, you want just enough documentation so that you can maintain the product, so people understand what the product's all about, and you can continue to use it and evolve it. And it's dependent on what the product content is. Yes, there's a lot of prescribed documentation, but when you go into the Agile world, you have to tailor what you need and only use just enough to meet all the requirements that are in that wonderful life cycle that we're all familiar with. And especially when you start talking about accreditation, those things are essential, and so we have to figure out what's just enough when you're building a system. The just enough will be different if you're building, say, software for a nuclear submarine versus software for an IT back office system. So you need to be very aware of what your context is. And finally, the last difference we found, the lifecycle model is separate with separate teams. There's a development team and test, and there's independent program IPTs, independent program teams, and they involve multiple functions, but that's sort of, they meet once a month, maybe once every 2 weeks. They talk about issues, big meeting like Mr. Kai say, and then everybody goes back to their corners, does their own thing. Maybe a month later they come back and they compare notes again. However, in Agile, you want a cross-functional team, and that includes all the roles throughout the life cycle. So you'll have a requirements guy, you'll have a tester, you'll have a coder, you'll have maybe a security person if that's important. You might have a domain expert for whatever you're building the software for. And they're all part of the team, and they're together throughout the life cycle. Now, cross-functional teams doesn't mean everybody on the team does everything together. If any of you have ever watched little kids, I'm thinking 4 or 5-year-olds play soccer, they're a team. Yes, they are a team, but they all converge on the ball and they play with the ball all together. That's not what we mean. We mean a more experienced team where everybody plays their positions, but they play them together and they reinforce each other. So if a developer has a question, they can talk to the system engineer, the requirements guy, and say, what did you mean by this? And there's no delay like we see in the traditional stovepipe systems of the last 20 years or so. Okay,
another quick polling question, folks. And we'll give you about 15 or 20 seconds to vote here. The question is, how big a challenge is your adoption of Agile practices? Please vote now. The options are large, we need a culture change; medium, we are running into issues; small, we are mostly ready; and lastly, no challenge at all. Okay, we'll push the survey results out now. And the majority, 57.9%. Actually, let me hit the push button so everybody else can see. 57.9% large, we need a culture change. 28.5 saying medium, we are running into issues. 8.8 saying small, we are mostly ready. And 4.6 saying no challenge at all. So I'm sure there's no surprise that over 70% are having some issues.
Wow.
Back to you, Marianne.
Thanks, Shane. No surprise at all, but I want to meet the 4.6% that has no challenge. I want to know how they're doing it. Okay, so we have knowledge pieces, as I said before, and some of the topics are kind of broad, but these are some of the culture things that you're going to have to think about. For those of you who are having some kind of culture, medium, small, medium, or large, you still need to figure out what you're going to do about each of these knowledge pieces. Okay, for organizational structure. In the traditional world, because we want to start there because that's what most people are familiar with, you have formal structures and they're very difficult to change. They're in place and they're in place. They're rigid. They're hierarchical. They're usually command and control. There's one person in charge that tells everybody else what to do on their team. And the integrated product teams have formal responsibilities and roles, and they meet at a prescribed amount of time, probably once a month, and they work through certain issues that's part of their charter. In the DoD Agile world, you're going to have flexible and adaptive structures. So your team's going to be cross-functional. It's going to be small, 5 to 7 people. You might have multiple teams that are going to work together, and they might be in different locations, but they're still going to have that constant communication. They're going to be self-organizing teams. Self-organizing doesn't mean they have no discipline. Doesn't mean they don't have any direction. It's basically you tell the team what you need them to do, and then they go off and figure out how to solve the problem. That's self-organizing. It's not chaos. As many people go, oh, self-organizing, that's chaos. No, it's not chaos. You give them the boundaries of their problem, tell them what you want them to do in general. I want you to solve XYZ problem, and then they go solve it. And the teams are co-located, or there's a strong communication mechanisms. Early on in Agile methods, the thought was everybody had to be in the same location, the same floor, the same building, maybe different floors in the same building, but they found as people got further apart, the collaboration got less and less. With today's environment, with all the tools we have Skype, we have Twitter, we have instant messaging, and the list goes on and on and on. You could be across the country, across the world for that matter, have a portal, and when you want to talk to Joe in San Francisco and you're in India, you go up and say, hey, Joe, is somebody there? Is Joe there? Let me talk to Joe. And he'll come up on his side of the screen and you can talk. So this co-location of teams has gotten easier because of the technology we've got in today's world. Leadership style is another puzzle piece. In the traditional world, the leader was the keeper of the vision, and he was the primary source of the authority to act. One person, one belly button is what they would say in the military. In the DoD Agile world, you want facilitative leadership, and that's a really hard change from taking, I'm going to tell you to do X, Y, Z, to being, okay, if you tried this, if you tried that, oh, you have a roadblock, let me go solve it for you. It's a totally different style, and a lot of people have a real hard time making that change. And the leader is the champion and the team advocate. They're going to defend that team. They're going to keep all the distraction away from them if they can possibly do so. And the more they are successful doing that, the more work that team can get done. And the team will go to their leader and say, you know, I have this roadblock, and this roadblock. And then that leader will go off and solve those for them. Okay, other puzzle pieces. The reward system. Traditionally, the individual is the one who gets the reward. So everybody wants to be the star, the superhero, and solve the problem, which is okay. But in Agile world, you want the team to be the focus of your reward system. And sometimes the team itself will say, you know, on our team, Joe today, or Sue, maybe, they did the best thing and they saved the bacon of the team. They solved that problem in the way that we had this big roadblock and they fixed it for us. We think for our reward coming up this quarter, this month, however often you do it, they should get the majority of the reward. The problem is, and this works in both traditional and Agile, people will do what you reward them for. So if you're still rewarding individuals for being the hero, you're not going to have much of a team. You need to figure out how to reward that team so they work more as a team. The staffing model. Traditionally, the life cycle model was separate teams. We had a team that did requirements. They threw it over the wall to the guys that did the design and probably coding. Then they'd throw it over the wall to the testers and walk away, more or less. And then finally the testers would get done with it and they'd find problems. They'd throw it back to the developers. They'd fix it. It'd go back over the wall to the testers. This went on forever. And then you'd have the integration problem and the whole thing would blow up in your face and you're like, oh my gosh, now who fixes it? That's taken care of in your Agile world. Your cross-functional teams, including all roles from all the life cycles, so you have one of each of those on the team, and they don't get through the iteration and get to done until it really works. So there's no throwing it over the wall. You're in it together, guys. You're either going to sink or swim in that boat that your team is in for that iteration. So you work together to solve the problems. And it's more efficient. Traditionally, different roles are active at different defined points in the cycle, so we do all the requirements up front, and now we're done and they're never going to change. That's the thinking. We all know that that's probably not true, but that's still the thinking. And then when the requirements are done, you give it to the design guys, and they design it, and probably work with and the developers and designers may or may not be the same people, and then the coders get in there and they do their thing, and then you get testers, and each role is very defined, and there's a demarcation between, and it's basically silos. And you're not involved in the other silos except maybe peripherally, and maybe at an IPT meeting. And that's when the finger pointing usually starts in the traditional methods. Well, if the requirements guys had did a better job, then us coders could have figured out what they wanted, and then it wouldn't have been a problem. And then the tester jumps in and says, yeah, if all you guys had done a better job, then I'd have had no problem. It would have passed, and we wouldn't be going through 16 iterations of the same problem. You've all been in those meetings. In the Agile world, you have an Agile advocate and a coach who explicitly attends to the team's process. So they make sure the team works together, especially new teams. If you start out and you don't have a coach or someone there who knows the process and helps you stick to it, you're going to very easily fade back into your old tried and true, what you know, and then you won't be doing Agile anymore. You're doing, some people once told me they called it WAGILE, waterfall and Agile together. It was sort of Agile, but it was more waterfall, but they didn't know really which one to call it. You don't want to go there. You want somebody who knows what they're doing, who's an Agile advocate and a coach who can help you. The job of that Agile coach is not to be there forever, but to teach you so that you can do it on your own, and then they work themselves out of a job and go coach the next team. Communication and decision-making is a big piece. Traditionally, top-down communication, everything comes from the top. You're going to do X, Y, Z, and it filters down. In the Agile world, you have daily stand-up meetings, usually 15 minutes every morning. People come in and they do three things. What did I do yesterday? What am I going to do today? And what problems did I have? Don't solve the problems, just what problems I have. And then at the end of the meeting, people figure out who has to go off and solve the problems. Usually it's probably your Agile advocate coach. But sometimes the team goes, I can help you with that problem, and they go off and solve the problem after that meeting, not during. Traditionally, there's external regulations and policies and procedures that drive the focus of the work, and they have to be adhered to. That's still true in an Agile world, but the way we adhere to them is probably slightly different because we know what they are, and we know what the regulations say, we know what the policies are, and we know what the procedures are. But then we box our sandbox, if you will, of how we're going to do our Agile work. So if there's certain, say, security requirements that we have to stay within, we know what they are, we know where our boundaries are, and if we think we're going to go outside them, that's when we raise the flag and get help that says, okay, we're going to have to do this to make this product work, but it's going to violate this security reg. Bring in the security guy and figure out what's going on. And so when you're doing Agile work, too, you do frequent retrospectives. At the end, you figure out, at the end of the iteration, you go, okay, what worked? What didn't work? How can we change it? How can we make it better? And traditionally, you have the indirect communications and documenting activities and processes, and they dominate face-to-face. People really don't want to do face-to-face, so they don't have to. But in Agile world, you want face-to-face. Face-to-face could be, like I said, over a Skype interface, but it's still face-to-face. You want open information, you want information radiators, whether it's stickies on a board, whether it's one of the many tools out there that are available to help you track your work. You want that, and you want it accessible to everyone in the team. Not only the people on the actual iteration team, but all the customers. In the case of the government program office would have access to that tool so they could see at any moment what's going on. You want the senior oversight people to be able to have access both within the development organization and the government organization. So information radiators, it's open, it's transparent. There's no surprise 6 months into the project, 2 years into the project. You know what's going on. All you have to do is go look. Going back to the traditional side, you have traditional representative documents, and the PMO uses them to oversee the progress of the developer. They don't necessarily have to do that as much with the information radiators because they can oversee by looking at those things. Now, I'm not saying don't get rid of the required documents because there are some that are required by law, but you do the minimal amount to make the information available that is required legally by the regulations and the statutes. You don't create paper just because somebody said, well, we should have an XYZ document. Ask yourself, do I really need that? Do I need it in its full glory, or can I tailor it? You want just enough documentation so the things that need to be done are documented, the things that need to be reviewed for, say, accreditation are available. So you want just enough documents to feed the conversation in a lot of these things. You don't want to have all the information down there because it's sort of cut and dried. You want people to talk. You want them to work together to create a better solution. And finally, on the traditional side, the PM oversight tools focus on demonstrating compliance versus achieving insight into the progress. Well, with our radiators, we already have insight. It's transparent. You can see what's going on every day. You do not have to worry about, well, I wonder when I'm going to get document XYZ so I can see how they're planning to do fill in the blank, some software development thing. You can go look and see where they are. You can say, oh, well, that particular requirement I'm worried about, that's not scheduled for another 3 iterations, so, okay, I know kind of when that's going to be. I'll come back and look. But, oh, this requirement I'm also interested in is scheduled for this iteration, so I can go out and see where they are on it. It's transparent. You have access. You know what's going on day to day. This next slide is just some references for you folks if you're interested in doing more. Most of the information I've talked about today comes from the second reference on the list. The in-process topics are some of the things that we are currently working on. Stay tuned. Some of them will be published soon. Hopefully all. I'm crossing my fingers on this one by the end of this fiscal year, which is the end of September. And as I said, we've got 25 or 30 more on a list that we're hoping to get to next year. The obligatory. And now questions and answers.
Okay, before we start our question and answer session, I wanted to remind everybody to please fill out the survey that will appear on your screen at the end of this session. Now on to our first question from Mary Ann. And that question is coming from Masur asking, how are you addressing change management challenges in the DoD to adopt Agile methodology?
Okay.
As Mr. Kai looks like a big advocate of Agile development. So.
Right. Well, change management is a big problem, and it's not change management as some people go, oh, change management, that's how we track the different iteration, releases of our software. No, change management in the sense of organizational change management, I think is probably what he's talking about. Okay, in our second paper, the one I pointed out on the previous list, there's a whole chapter about change management and the kinds of things you will see and the kinds of things you need to prepare yourself for in order to, make it happen correctly. One of the things people don't understand is when anytime you embark on one of these changes, there's a thing, I believe it's called the Satir model, and you start out and everything like, wow, this is great, and everybody's excited, and you kind of see an increase in productivity, and all of a sudden everybody figures out, this is hard, and productivity drops off, and it looks like you go down into this canyon, and then you wall around at the bottom of that canyon for a while until you figure out what you're doing, and then you climb up out of it, and then pretty soon, as you come up out of it, your productivity increases again. This is normal, folks. Expect it. If you don't have that, cool, but expect it. Don't get upset when it happens. Figure out how you're going to fix it. Plan for it. Remember, your first few iterations are going to be kind of painful because you're doing something totally different. And this model is not just for this kind of thing. It's been proven, I believe, in psychology circles. This is how change management happens. So if you want to know more, again, I'll point you back to the paper because there's like 20 pages about how you have to deal with change management.
Okay, on to our next question from Satish asking, how are open source and agile principles synergistic? What are the implications to DoD's COTS policies?
Good question. I don't have an answer today.
Okay. So we'll keep moving along. Folks, if there's something we can't address today, you can always send any question to info@scii.cmu.edu. We'll try to get an answer for you, but we're going to keep to Mary Ann's expertise, and we'll move on to the next question. Actually, this is something that Terry had mentioned on the Agile workbook. Are you familiar with the workbook she was referring to?
The handbook?
When it may be available publicly?
I know there is a final copy out in draft for some more review of the actual release date. I have not heard. So I would say keep your eyes open, stay tuned, and actually inquire in Ms. Takai's office, and she might be able to give you an actual date.
Okay. Excellent. We're getting lots of questions, folks, about slides and if a recording will be available. The slides are available now in your console for download. You'll see a PDF of each presentation. The recording will be available most likely in 2 days. And for anybody registered, you'll get an email with access to that recording. Next question for Mary Ann from Ronnie asking, who are your DoD stakeholders?
Well, we have a lot of them. We've gone to a lot of different conferences, both commercial and DoD. In fact, the very first Agile conference I went to was one of the big ones down in Florida. And I apologize to anyone who was at that conference because I was probably the biggest pest there, because anybody who would talk to me, I would ask them, so how does this Agile thing work, and would it work in DoD? I had one interesting guy come up to me and say, what's the big deal? It's commander's, intent. They're told, here's your mission, go figure out how to do it, which is kind of what Agile does for your empowered teams. But I digress. We have an Agile collaboration group that we started in November, and it's made up of folks from interested DoD government employees and some of the other contractors. I have people on that committee, and actually these are our advisors. They're from the Air Force, the Marines, the Navy, DISA, DHS, Navy, did I say? Army. And then we have representatives from companies like Boeing, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Jacobs Hybrid. If you are interested, and I think Shane may be giving you the information later, again, send an email to info at sei.cmu.edu and ask for that, and they'll get it to me, and I can send you the information. Government employees can join. There is no charge to join this. Government employees are free to join. They don't have to do anything except say, I'm interested. If you're a contractor or an FFRDC, there is a non-disclosure agreement that you'd have to work through your legal and our legal to sign. But other than that, it's free to join.
Okay, next question from Cheryl asking, which Agile practice is the DoD primarily using, Scrum or XP? Is the DoD planning to use other Agile practices such as pair programming?
Well, pair programming is one of the concepts of XP, so I have seen some of the groups use that. Actually, the usage of their tools, Scrum is like everywhere else, probably the most widely used. A combination of Scrum and XP together is used by a lot of folks because Scrum, as you all know, is more of a management technique. XP is the more common, although there are others, is probably one of the more common technical techniques, and a lot of people find combining concepts from both of them together makes for a really strong approach. One of the more successful programs that we know, it's called Patriot Excalibur. It's an Air Force program, uses concepts of Scrum and XP together.
Okay, excellent. Next question from Leonard asking, what is the most successful Agile team you have seen in the DoD so far?
Oh, that's not fair. That's
Loaded
not
question.
Fair. Loaded question. There's several out there. I've seen some good ones in the Air Force. We've seen some in the Navy. Actually, there's one in the Army that received some awards from the NDIA System Engineering Conference. The Marines actually are starting on a program, so they're working real hard to bring it into their development expertise also. So I'm going to kind of pass on that one because that's not fair. I don't want to forget somebody. They're all doing some good stuff.
Okay, quick question, just asking how many participants in the forum today? We had over 1,300 register. Don't know the exact live number right now, but a nice crowd and a nice mix, so we thank you all again for joining us. We got about 3 minutes left with Marianne, so we'll go on to the next question. And from Gert asking, do you see a lot of differences in applying quality assurance between traditional and Agile software development?
Yes and no. If a quality assurance program is done well in traditional, it would probably be very similar to what you see in Agile. The difference I would see is because you're doing potentially shippable code each iteration, that includes the quality assurance piece. So it's part of that iteration. If it isn't, shame on you. And quality assurance, and depending on how you define it, some people define quality assurance as test. To me, it means more than test, but it's built in, has to be built in from the beginning, and some of the traditional programs do that too. If you're adding it on at the end, it's of course not going to be as effective. So in Agile, it's actually probably easier to do it because you're developing potentially shippable. That's one of the definitions of done. At the end of the iteration, so it has to pass the quality assurance test, or it's not done. So it's easier, I think, in the Agile world.
Okay. We got about a minute left, so we'll do one more question, and this is from Prasanth asking, how do you handle continuous training and coaching of distributed teams to keep them performing at high levels?
Oh, that is hard. A lot of that would depend on Some of the groups I've worked with have multiple coaches, one at each location. Some of it would depend on how your organization is set up. If you only have one coach, that makes it even harder. But then again, with the communication tools we have today, you'd have to use those heavily. And I think that the answer on that one, it depends on how your organization is constructed.
Okay, we'll let Marianne off the hot seat. Marianne, great job. Thank you very much for your participation.